Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Josie Show. I'm Josie. I'm the redheaded libertarian, and today is kind of my Olympics. Today is the eve of the 250th anniversary of this great nation. And I was talking in the Discord ahead of this, trying to figure out what we're going to do today, and I was thinking I would read the Declaration of Independence. And then I'm thinking, you know what? I have that on my channel. I read the Declaration of Independence and I released it this morning at 11 o'clock. So if anybody does want to see that, they can see that. What I was thinking of doing is actually talking about what led up to everything and then discussing the grievances after that. So they didn't just decide frivolously one day, you know what, we don't want to pay taxes anymore. We don't want to be under Britain's rule anymore. This was years and years coming. This started as far back as, if you want to get real deep, it started like with the molasses tax back in the 1730s, but it really sort of came to a head with the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act and the Townshend Acts. Now, these were three acts that were dropped in 64, 65, and 67, I believe. And so what happened, King George was taxing everything from like paper and tea. He was taxing individual pieces of paper. Okay, like he was completely insane. So this gave rise to the Sons of Liberty, and the Sons of Liberty organized protests and riots and the Boston Tea Party and all of this. They were the big organizers. But what really did it was the Townshend Acts. Okay, before he dropped the Townshend Acts, King George sent something like 2,000 redcoats to occupy Boston. And this is because with the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act, there were riots, and he wanted to quell those before they happened. So by the time the Townshend Acts were released, Massachusetts was in a police state. Now, what did that mean? It meant that there was like maybe one redcoat for every 9 colonists. It was heavily police state. So they continued to have their protests after protests after protests. Now, in February of 1770, there was just another protest, right? And this was happening in front of the store of a man named Theophilus Lilly. And Theophilus Lilly was a loyalist, and he was still kind of running his store, even though the colonists were really opposing it. He was like, whatever, I'm a dirty Tory, I'm going to run my store, and there's nothing you can do about it. So anyway, there was an informant named Ebenezer Richardson, and he was like kind of the town snitch, and everybody knew it. Nobody liked him, right? So he would hang out in front of Theophilus Lilly's store, and he would report colonists, and nobody liked him. So anyway, it's February 22nd, and it's having this normal protest in front of the store, and Ebenezer shows up, and somebody had put a sign up in the window that said informant, and he got really mad and he lost his shit. And then the colonists started like throwing sticks and dirt at him, and he got so mad he ran to his house and he grabbed a gun, and the colonists were still throwing dirt at him and everything, and his house was like right next to the store. So from inside of his house, he shot into the crowd twice. And he shot 2 boys. One of them died. That was the first death of the revolution. We hear that it's Crispin Attucks, the freed slave, because everything has to be about slavery and told through the Marxist land of victim oppressor. But no, he was the second. But the first one was the little boy, Christopher Snyder. I think he's about 12 years old. And I say Cedar Snyder because he was an immigrant, and it's unclear which was his name. I believe on the memorial for him, it's Snyder, but in the newspaper, it was Cedar. So there was just a little miscommunication with everything. So Dr. Joseph Warren, who is my favorite founding father, tried to save him and couldn't, and he ends up dying. This was February 22nd of 1770, and riots broke out every single night. There were riots and protests. They were infuriated that this boy was shot. Now, Ebenezer Richardson was put into prison when this happened, okay? He was held in prison for 2 years. I'm going to get to that. So anyway, he's in prison, but every night there's riots and there's protests and people are really mad. Now rolls up to March 5th of 1770. Boston Massacre. This was another riot. They were rioting over the death. It wasn't, I wouldn't even call it a riot. It was snowballs and dirt. It was just a crowd that got out of hand. And they were throwing dirt and throwing snowballs and everything at the redcoats. They got flustered and shot to the crowd, killed 5 people. You know how that goes. John Adams represents them and gets them off with manslaughter when they were being tried for murder. And that was really dramatic. He like had his practice suffer and everything like that. But anyway, 1770, bad things happen. So anyway, they're still having the taxes. Everything is still really, really bad. And then comes 1773 and we have the Boston Tea Party. And now the Boston Tea Party was organized by a man that nobody knows the identity to this day. He went by Rusticus. All right. This is why anonymity is so important. It really builds revolutions. So Rusticus put out these signs and it said, every night, shout out at 12:30, beware the East India Company. And so the redcoats were mad. They're like, who's doing this? We don't know who's doing this. This isn't cool. And they're trying to protest, right? And so they're threatening that they're going to do this, that they're going to dump the tea. And they went all the way to the governor about this. And there was Sam Adams and there was Dr. Joseph Warren, and they're having these protests on the steps, of the hall, and they're trying to get it so that they don't have to pay these taxes anymore. And it didn't go well. And so then what happened that night is the governor's like, listen, there's nothing that we can do to help you. You guys are on your own. And so that night there were chants that rang out through the streets of Boston that said, make Boston a tea kettle, make Boston Harbor a tea kettle tonight. And so what happened? They all dressed as natives. They went onto the ship. They dumped the chests of tea, 342 chests of tea, into the ocean. And after that, that was like the powder keg, I would say. So after that, King George levied what's called the Intolerable Acts. And that's many of the grievances are from these Intolerable Acts. He essentially took away Massachusetts' ability to self-govern. He closed their harbor and said, we're not going to open this until you reimburse the East India Company and for all their lost tea. And that was about $1 million in today's money. Benjamin Franklin offered to pay it, and they said, no, don't. And they didn't pay that back. They never paid it back. And then after the war, they opened up their own harbor. So Boston Harbor remained closed to the colonists and for trade the whole time. But that was the biggest one. They weren't able to govern themselves anymore. They were strictly punished. And this is when the other colonies were like, wow, if they can do this in Massachusetts, they can do this to us too. So they began sort of rising up around Massachusetts over the next year. And it just became worse and worse and worse. And I mean, the redcoats were also committing atrocities. They were burning towns to the ground. They were committing murders of people. And then they were having mock trials. There was no justice. They lived in a place where there was no justice. A kitten just got out, and there's one of my cats staring it down. So if there's any freaking out, I'm going to fix it. But just a heads up. Okay. So anyway, 1775 rolls around, right? We're at April 18th of 75. And the spies get word that the redcoats are going to go into Lexington and Concord, and they were going to take the powder stores, the guns, the weaponry, and take them from the colonists. And the other reason they're going into town is because Sam Adams and John Hancock had warrants out for their arrest because they were the main organizers next to Rusticus of the Boston Tea Party, and they were evading arrest. And they got word that they were staying in the Hancock house in Lexington. So what happened is Paul Revere, and he had 2 other riders with him. Anyway, those names are escaping me right now. One's Samuel and one is escaping me. Somebody knows them in the chat. Drop their names in the chat. Sorry, I'm doing all this from memory, guys. So anyway, Paul Revere and these other 2 riders, they go take off. They're going to go to Lexington and Concord. Paul Revere has the fastest horse, and he makes it to Lexington. And his job was first to warn Sam Adams and John Hancock that they got to get out of Dodge. And the first rider that I meant, that I don't remember the name of, he gets all the way and he's able to warn everybody in Lexington, right? But on his way to Concord, he gets thrown off his horse and he has to walk back. And so the only guy that actually warned everybody was Samuel Bissell. And he was the only one. And he was able to, that's the wrong last name, Samuel Prescott. And he was able to go into Lexington and go into Concord and warn everybody. So we hear about Paul Revere giving the midnight ride and warning all the people, but he didn't even do that. He went and he got warned Sam Adams and John Hancock. So it's actually, we should be hearing about Samuel Prescott because he's the one who actually did the ride and warned everybody. Paul Revere actually got caught by redcoats on his way to Concord. So he got caught by redcoats. They held him and they kidnapped his horse. And then they gave him like a really like shitty horse instead, like a really old, awful horse. So it's just, William Dawes. Yes, thank you. William Dawes. That was driving me crazy. I'm like, never had a brain fart like that before. William Dawes got thrown from his horse. So it was Paul Revere got taken by the redcoats. They ended up letting him go. They knew who he was and they, took him. Now, the next day was the battles of Lexington and Concord, and the colonists won. They won that because they had all of this warning and they knew what was happening. They knew who was coming. So they were able to hide in the swamps and the bushes, and then just pop out like daisies and just peck off the redcoats as they're walking 10 miles down Battle Road. So it's like, it is, what's based off that is that scene from The Patriot. You know the scene where they're hiding in the woods. That is what happened. That was Lexington and Concord. That's where Mel Gibson got that inspiration from, where they're all hiding in the woods and kind of pecking off the redcoats. So if you want to kind of relive what that was what that was. He actually, side note, Mel Gibson was based off, his character was based off the Swamp Fox, who was this guerrilla warfare, like ghost essentially, that was down in like South Carolina area. And he was just a hero of the revolution. But anyway, I digress. They win Lexington and Concord. Then we get up to June and there's the Battle of Bunker Hill, which is technically a redcoat win because everybody ran out of ammo and they had to turn to hand-to-hand combat. During that battle, my favorite founding father, who's so underrated, it's Dr. Joseph Warren. He ends up dying. And I call him the Charlie Kirk of their time, okay? So he was young, he was beloved doctor, and he was also an organizer and very respected, gifted orator. And he ends up being recognized by the redcoats. And he had a promotion. He wasn't even supposed to be down. He was fighting as a private. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He was promoted. He should have been up on the hill, but he said, no, I didn't earn this. I'm going to go down. I'm going to fight with the men. And so that's what he did. He got on the ground. He fought with the men. He got recognized. Somebody killed him for who he was. And Paul Revere and his brother searched for him for the next 9 months until they found his body, because they desecrated his body and buried him in a shallow grave, but they found him and now he's properly buried. So, I mean, I could go over battle after battle. There were 200 to 300 battles and skirmishes that happened for the Boston Tea Party. We had Saratoga, which really turned the tides of everything. There was crossing the Delaware, which was, just a great story in and of itself as well. There was just so much that happened and so many heroes. But it came down to all of this happened up and through the Battle of Bunker Hill. That was all before we even had a Declaration of Independence. So that was the point that I was getting to. Now we're having all these battle skirmishes and the redcoats are burning shit to the ground and everybody's mad. Everybody's fighting. There's a lot of internal just tension. And so June rolls around of 1776 and Richard Henry Lee releases this act, and he's like, this is the Lee Resolution, and I think that we should be free and independent. And so they're like, you know what? I think this is a good idea. We're not going to do anything to vote on it yet. Kitten, stop it. We're not going to do anything to vote on it yet. But we are going to organize a committee of 5 to write a Declaration of Independence. So what happened? They picked the Committee of Five. It was Ben Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. They put these guys in a committee and they said, okay, now we need to figure out who is going to be the main writer. And they determined it would be Ben Franklin, John Adams, or Thomas Jefferson. Now, John Adams immediately gets behind Jefferson. And he's like, this guy is just a gifted writer. He holds my attention more than even Sam Adams does. And that's his cousin. So I was really speaking a lot. He's like, I get behind him. And the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, they were grateful for this because they all feared within themselves that Benjamin Franklin would write a joke and stick it into the Declaration of Independence, and every single one of them would miss it until it was too late. So when the vote came down, it did become Thomas Jefferson was the head writer of it. And so that was June 11th, my birthday, when that happened. That was also Dr. Joseph Warren's birthday, June 11th, very important day in history. So anyway, this happens, and it takes Thomas Jefferson till about the 28th of June to write this. So he's just holed up in a room on Market Street writing this. And it was up to John Adams and Ben Franklin to do the edits on it. So the most famous edit was Ben Franklin, actually. Thomas Jefferson had said, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. And Ben Franklin changed it to, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So that's really the most famous one of the edits that happened. There was inalienable. They changed to unalienable. That was another one. And then he wrote just the most impassioned speech against King George, or I guess article in the Declaration, the first draft against King George. And my kittens are playing with my camera string. Sorry if I'm wiggling. I don't want to get anyone motion sick. So he wrote this impassioned speech against King George and the transatlantic slave trade. And every single line had to be unanimous when they voted on every single line. And Georgia and South Carolina were like, nope, not going to do that. We can't. Our economy depends way too much on slavery. We can't denounce the slave trade. We can't get behind these lines. So because two states said no, we had slavery and we had the Civil War and we have what we have today, the people demanding reparations and all this, all because of South Carolina and Georgia. So you have them to thank for it. But his speech was so powerful and so impassioned. And the amount of people that don't know it and have never heard it is shocking to me. This is also on my YouTube page. You can go listen to that quotation from the first draft of the Declaration. It was one of the only passages that were wholly stripped. And it pretty much called King George a pirate, like a Muslim pirate, which was a really awful thing to do, you know, and really like saying, oh, you're a Christian? Are you though? So it really spit in his face. But yeah, they pulled it out, which is sad to me. But that was taken out today in history. It was taken out. And tomorrow is the day they voted on the final draft of it. Tomorrow is the 250th anniversary of our great nation. So that is really just the history of what happened leading up until the Declaration of Independence. But I talked for a long time. We can talk about the grievances too, but I don't know if anybody wants to come up for a question.
We do have a question from an audience member.
Mm-hmm.
Pastor Gandalf says, as a new history teacher teaching government, what recommended readings would you suggest, like primary documents? They are seniors in high school.
Okay. Here it is. This is number one. Okay. This is in retrospect of the Boston Tea Party. This is the only firsthand account that we have of the Boston Tea Party. So what happened for the Boston Tea Party, essentially all the guys and women that were involved, there were men and women involved. We know about 100 names now at this point, but everybody kind of made this agreement amongst themselves that they were going to keep their own secret. Nobody was going to tell anybody else's secret. And they were going to take it to their graves or wait at least 50 years. So this was published in 1834. So 1773 to 1834. He waited the 50 years and he did this publishing of it. But it's so cool the way that it's written. So it's actually taken from the type of that time. See, you can't even tell what it says because it's so small. But this I would wholly recommend for sure. And so many people don't know that it exists. It's a memoir of George R.T. Hughes. He was one of the people who did this. Just a normal person like you or like me. He ended up meeting George Washington at one point, and George Washington called him like a really nice guy. And he knew Paul Revere. But he was just a normal guy, and he told a story, and nobody really knows about it. So 100%. And of course, the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, and stick as much to source documents as you possibly can. All of my research comes from reading old newspapers, and it is fascinating. There's one, my favorite old newspaper story. They actually talk about Roman history and go like really in depth in it. And I'm just like intrigued. I like can't look away from this paper. Now, what's hard about that is the S's look like F's. So you have to like train your brain around that, just kind of the old font. But those, I would have them look up old newspapers from around the time of events and find firsthand what happened through that way. It's fascinating, and it'll keep them in love with history for the rest of their lives.
All right, perfect. I thought of a question.
Yep.
So, what is your favorite story from the founding of America that people don't commonly know?
Mine, hmm. Well, the newspaper wars is always a fun one. Some people do know about this, other people don't. I wouldn't say it's my favorite story to really have to think about my favorite story, but a really cool story is the
And what is
newspaper.
that newspaper?
So what happened is when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who were best friends, as we know, best friends at the beginning and best friends at the end, but in the middle there was about 10 to 20 years where they were not. They didn't speak. Um, so what had happened, they were both running for president. And John Adams was trying to have, John Adams, he was definitely more of a Federalist. And Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, which doesn't mean what it means today. It doesn't even make sense today. So essentially, he was like a libertarian, okay? And John Adams was like a Republican. And you're kind of seeing maybe the sort of dynamic we have today with those two. But John Adams was like, I'm going to arrest journalists who say bad things about me. And Thomas Jefferson's like, you can't do that because we have something called the First Amendment. So John Adams hired somebody to say really mean things about Jefferson in the newspaper. And so Jefferson got so mad, so he hired another paper to say really mean things about Jefferson. So Jefferson hired somebody to say mean things about Adams, who hired somebody to say mean things about Jefferson, and they're going back and forth, and they are saying unbelievably horrid things. They're saying, it's calling like a half breed, a hermaphrodite. Like they're making all these claims, and we don't have the internet, or they didn't have the internet then. They can't just look this up and say, is John Adams a hermaphrodite? You know, they can't figure that out. And then at one point, I think it was, I can't remember which campaign, but they reported that the other guy was dead. And that's a big thing because news didn't spread like it does now, but they reported that one of them was dead. So, you know, they ended up really getting upset at each other, and especially Adams. And I think it came down to the death of Thomas Jefferson's wife. And I think Abigail's like, John, you got to reach out. And he did. And they started corresponding back and forth slowly again until they were friends once again. And they died on the same day, as everybody knows, about 6 hours apart on the 4th of July, 50 years after the signing. So yeah, it's an interesting story. And you should look it up if you can, because there are a lot of really like just the worst drags you've ever seen people call each other, and it was powerful stuff. But yeah, that's a real fun story.
Another question.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the grievances, since we didn't get too much into them, is there one that you see any kind of parallels to today?
Oh, there's several.
What's the
Grievances 8, 9, 18, 19, 12, and 15 all have to do with two tiers of justice in captured courts to some level. Yep.
Okay.
I'm seeing more in England because England didn't change. England's exactly the same as it's always been. Nothing changed. So with England, So I guess think about the situation in England, and then I'm going to tell you about some of these grievances. King George was paying people from other countries to come in and kill the colonists. He had the Hessians, the Canadians, the natives. And then another thing that he was doing, they were actually taking colonists out to the ocean and saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. And this is the 26th grievance. You can look it up. They're saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. You are going to kill all your family and your friends, or you're going to walk the plank right now. So that's your choice. You're either going to kill yourself right now, or we're going to take you back and you're going to slaughter your family. So that's what they were doing. The Navy, the British Navy was doing that. So I'm seeing a lot of parallels there with, third worlders being paid to come into the country and murder little girls and boys. So definitely some really sick parallels. But for us, it's more the law stuff that I'm seeing.
Great. Sorry, there was a noise in the background.
That's okay.
Okay, so Revolutionary War, that's a little bit after, obviously, but as we celebrate America 250, that's very impactful.
Yeah.
What do you think was the single turning point that really won that for America? Assuming you know a bit about that as well.
Yes. So it was more negotiations that were happening. So the Treaty of Paris. So America won, right? We won. We got what we wanted. It was the Treaty of Paris that was like, okay, we got to stop this, and here's how we're going to stop this. And they put down the terms. And so that was really what did it. What put it over was the negotiations for that, Ben Franklin. So we have a constitution because the Articles of the Confederation were not strong enough to enforce the Treaty of Paris. And that's why we have one, because they were just going to keep us as a confederation. But they couldn't get the Redcoats out. The Redcoats were squatting. They were still trying to collect on old debts. They were doing all the things that they weren't supposed to do, and there was no federal way to enforce it. So that's why we have a federation.
Cool. And I don't know too much about the grievances. So how many are there, and how exhaustive is that list?
There are 27. We can talk about them. We got plenty of time. I appreciate everybody listening to me try to talk about the history, because there's kittens running everywhere. They're shaking the camera, and so I appreciate your patience. I'm not an excellent public speaker to begin with, so that was really challenging. Okay. Now, I wrote them down because I do know a lot about history, but I do not have them memorized. So let me just pull them up. Okay, so first, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to the separation. So that's how Thomas Jefferson opened with the Declaration of Independence. He said it in plain terms: if you're going to break away from a country, you owe the world an honest explanation of why. So the founders didn't just declare their independence, they built a very powerful case for it. And they listed 27 specific grievances against King George. And these are concrete examples of how the king had reportedly and repeatedly abused power, violated rights, treated the colonists like second-class citizens. I'm sorry, second-class subjects. That's important. Second-class subjects instead of a free people. So here I wrote down those 27 grievances, and here's what they are and what they mean. All right. 1, King George wouldn't pass laws necessary for the good of the people. He vetoed or he ignored colonial laws that would help everyday life. 2, King George wouldn't let governors pass laws. He blocked governors from acting on urgent local issues without his personal approval, and then he ignored them. 3, if colonists wanted laws passed, King George required them to give up their right of representation. He demanded colonies surrender their voice in government to get basic laws approved. 4, Parliament was only held in England. And this was meant to discourage or to fatigue the colonists, because England was 6 weeks to get to England. It's like, how do you do that, So he forced lawmakers to travel to distant, uncomfortable places just to wear them down. 5, King George dissolved the colonial legislatures. He shut down elected colonial assemblies that opposed him. 6, its dissolution left the colonies in danger with no local government. Colonies were vulnerable to invasion or chaos, and he refused to let new ones form. 7, King George restricted immigration to the colonies and raised property taxes to make up for it. He blocked new settlers and he made land harder to get, which hurt growth. 8, King George obstructed the administration of justice and dissolved the colonial courts. He refused to approve laws creating proper courts. 9, King George gave himself the full authority to hire, pay, and fire judges. Judges now answered only to him, not the law or the people. 10, new soldiers and swarms of officers were sent by the king to harass the colonists. He flooded colonies with officials and troops who burdened everyday life. 11, King George kept a standing army at peacetime without the consent of the colonial legislatures because he had dissolved them. He maintained permanent troops among the civilians without approval. 12, soldiers were held above the law and the justice system. He made the military independent of and superior to civilian authority. 13, King George and his parliament didn't represent the colonists. He imposed a foreign jurisdiction and laws the colonists never consented to. 14, soldiers were quartered on colonial properties. Troops were forced to live in colonist houses. People always make fun of the Third Amendment, which says you can't quarter troops in our homes. It was a big deal because that was happening. Like, imagine if all of a sudden you had to have people of, an invading nation stay in your home. I would love, and that's never been ruled on ever by the Supreme Court or anything. I'd love to have like a Third Amendment case come through the Supreme Court. I think that'd be cool. 15, mock trials were held for soldiers accused of murder. He protected soldiers from real punishment for killing colonists. 16, King George cut off colonial trade from the rest of the world when he closed the harbor and more. He destroyed the colonies' ability to trade freely. 17, this is the only one we ever hear about taxation without representation. He imposed taxes without any colonial input. 18, no trial by jury. He stripped away the rights to a fair jury trial in many cases. 19, King George required colonists accused of a crime to be tried in England. He forced people to travel overseas for sham trials. That's insane, isn't it? 20, King George had been encouraging changes in Canada, Quebec, that could threaten the colonies. He expanded arbitrary rule in neighboring Canada as a model for controlling the colonies. 21, King George abolished the colonial charters. He took away the fundamental governing documents of the colonies. 22, King George and Parliament had been legislating for colonists without their representation. They claimed total power to make laws for the colonies in all cases. This is the one that I feel like we're seeing a lot of today. I don't think there's a lot of representation due to lobbyists and donors that have more say than us. 23, King George had abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He abandoned his role and started open warfare against the colonies. 24, King George had authorized destruction of colonial land and towns, plundered the seas, burned towns, and ravaged the coast. 25, King George sent German Hessians to hunt down and ruthlessly kill the colonists. He imported foreign mercenaries for total war. 26, the British Navy was practicing piracy on the seas. Colonists were taken captive and were ordered to kill their family or friends or die. He forced captured Americans to fight against their own people. And 27, King George had excited domestic insurrections and armed the natives to attack the colonists. He stirred up slave revolts and encouraged frontier attacks by native tribes. So when you look at all 27 grievances together, the pattern is unmistakable. King George was systematically stripping away the colonists' right to safety and their own ability to govern. And at a certain point, the colonists reached their limit. And I think it was I don't even know if it was death by 1,000 paper cuts that did it. It was like, okay, now, but it just seemed like morale was just suffering. And they were just the smartest group of men all in one place. They were brilliant, this group of brilliant minds. And they really just reached into the Enlightenment era, and they're like, no, we need to self-govern. Like, kings aren't better than us. And the fact that Thomas Jefferson wrote Citizens and he didn't write Subjects. Initially, he did write Subjects, and you can see it now. They went in with like a light and saw that he had crossed out Subjects and wrote Citizens over it. And I think that was the most powerful. That was really just a shot in the heartstring to King George there of questioning the power, because we'd always been ruled over. We'd always been ruled by kings. So this is why it was the American experiment. Now, what was that?
I was going to ask where you got all this knowledge.
I'm an autodidact, so I just read everything and internalize it. And then I try to present it in a way that anybody can understand it. Yeah. So another interesting fact about the Declaration of Independence is the copy that went to King George only had 2 signatures on it. It didn't have all those signatures. Those took a series of months to get. But John Hancock, and if you look at the copy, I have it on my page today, actually. He still had his name huge. His name was written the size of the title of the document. It was still enormous at the bottom. So he's like, John Hancock. And he was still wanted. He's still evading arrest. And he's like, ha, ha, ha. I was so taunting him. And then Charles Thompson, who was the secretary. So all it had was the president and the secretary. And so those 2 men were like, we're signing this document. And nobody else at that point, by the time it got to King George, was complicit. He said Congress was involved in it. That it said that it is. And we're a group of men and we're pledging to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. But those were the 2 signatures on it. So those were the 2 men who risked everything. And so many people don't even know Secretary Thompson existed, but he was one of the main names. So yeah, that's a little fun tidbit too. But so King George was going to find out who did sign it eventually, because that was going to make its way. Once it was all signed, it was going to make its way to England. My favorite signature in there is John Carroll of Carrollton. I think it was John. It was Carroll of Carrollton, Thomas or John. It was one of those biblical names. Charles, something like that. Might have been Charles. Anyway, Carroll of Carrollton. So essentially what he said is, this is who I am and this is where you can find me. He wrote where he could be located. And he was essentially the Elon Musk of the time. So he had the most money. He was like equivalent to a billionaire. And he like owned the town, and he's like, here I am and you can come find me here. And this guy, he was Catholic. He was the only Catholic that signed. And they were already dealing with enough like oppression as it was. And he just didn't give a shit. So I really love just that attitude.
Sure. Okay, so looking at the entire founding era,
Mm-hmm.
what's the coolest little fact that you might have? Maybe not the coolest, but something that's cool that you learned and you like to tell people because they might not know it because, the American school systems kind of suck. So what's something that you think isn't taught that should be taught more? It's interesting.
That's a really good question. I'm thinking about it. Are there any other questions while I think about this one? I want to answer this one really well.
I'm waiting on them to ask a couple more, but okay, we've got someone that can ask a few. Would you like to come up, sir? Or you can type them, whatever you want to do. Okay, perfect. Here we go. I
think I want real history taught. We don't get that. We have people trying to rewrite it all the time, and I want real history taught. That's why I read old newspapers and I read old books, and when I read a biography, I read another biography and check it against that biography and look at their sources. And I want real history. I don't want anything made up. And I'm so tired. Oh, you know what? This is what we're going to talk about. I really don't care how controversial it is. I knew there was something. Thomas Jefferson. Okay. He was a slave owner. He inherited his slaves. Now, Thomas Jefferson bought slaves too. The only slaves he bought, this guy, he inherited his slaves. He never wanted to be a slave owner. Okay. So his slaves were educated and well housed and fed. They could leave if they wanted to, but of course they risked shit that would happen to them if they did, because of all of the agenda that was installed to keep slavery happening. They're like, you let them go and somebody else would take them because they were property. So the only slaves, and this is documented in the Jefferson Papers, and it's documented in all of the books, everything in the presidential library. The only people he bought were families to reunite them. That's it. So this guy didn't want to be a slaveholder. He tried to abolish it because there was no good way to abolish this. So, okay. So essentially slavery, all right? You couldn't just free your slaves. You had to go through a series of steps. So first you had to prove that they were meritorious. So essentially you had to prove that you had a slave and your slave saved a white woman from a fire, right? So to prove that, which that wasn't the kind of thing that was happening. People just didn't want to have them and they'd inherit them and there's nothing they could do about it. They could only be freed on their deathbed. So you had to die or be a slave owner, essentially. So you had to prove the meritorious service, and you had to do that before a jury. And I mean, say this jury was like, okay, cool, that's great. We're gonna let you free your slave, but then you needed to provide, I think it was 50. I don't know how this math went. 50 sterling. Okay, so you essentially had to pay for them for the rest of their life and put up a surety to support them as well. So if you had 100 slaves, it was going to come to like $2 million that you needed to pay to free your slaves for their sureties. So you need to prove their meritorious service and then support them for the rest of their life. And then if God forbid something happened, you would be in trouble for it. So there was just a lot that was institutionalized to keep slavery. Thomas Jefferson hated it. He fought against it. He tried to abolish it several times, at least 3 or 4 that we know about, because he just didn't want to live that life. And he was able to abolish all of the ones that his brother fathered. By the way, it wasn't him, it was his brother. He was able to free them on his deathbed. We know it was his brother because everybody knew it was his brother. But, that kind of stuff gets lost to history, and then you just have to look it up and find it. So anyway, that's what I want taught, that Thomas Jefferson really just didn't want to own slaves, was forced into owning slaves, had no way to get rid of slaves. He managed to pay off 2 of their mortgages in his lifetime, because mortgages were like student loan debt. You were stuck with it. So anyway, institutionalized slavery. Okay. Question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I came up to ask questions.
Yeah.
And you went on.
What's up? I thought about my answer. Yeah. Go for it.
You had something that I had to let you finish. I was like, but no, my question, or I guess I got a few questions, is what do you think they would be most upset about in the current system of government?
What would our founders be most upset about?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it depends on which one. Thomas Jefferson would be pissed about the Federal Reserve.
Okay.
George Washington would not want us in Iran, no matter what AI George Washington told Glenn Beck. That would not happen. Yeah. Patrick Henry would just be pissed about every amendment added beyond the Bill of Rights. So yeah, it would depend on which founding father.
Well, I mean, I was mostly talking about the actual structure of government.
Oh, the structure, how it's expanded beyond what they wanted it to be.
Well, like the 17th Amendment taking away and putting.
Oh, they'd all be mad about that. That's not what they agreed upon. That's not what they wanted.
Upon, but weren't there a few people who were asking for more like direct elections kind of thing? Though?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I mean,
it was direct democracy, and it's dangerous, and it's why we are the way that we are. Democracy. Yeah. We can buy up a democracy. I mean, it's easier to buy up than a republic.
Yeah, the other thing I guess what I would ask in the structure of government is fund or throw out there something to be upset about is the reapportionment for House representatives kind of thing, because I mean that's changed a couple of times.
Yeah, I think that that goes with the census. So I wonder. I mean, it changes about every 10 years, I think. But I mean, we need to say back past. We got to get people out of this country because they count bodies, not citizens.
I've constantly thought of, probably for a couple of weeks, actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking about this for 1 or 2 weeks, about why we're not doing a census every 5 years as opposed to 10 years.
Yeah.
Just because we're physically capable of it, and we have the technology to do it. So there's no reason
They have the
not to.
technology and they're more than happy to waste the money to do anything. So yeah, I guess it's just like, well, we can't actually work. Why would we spend the money to work? So yeah, I guess every
I'm
10
sorry.
years.
I just looked up and Olivia's eyes were just like wide. So anyhow, but no, the other question is, in modern society, what do you think they would be upset about? Do you think they'd be more shocked at the amount of atheists, or they'd be more shocked at just the way society goes around?
I think there was a lot of things that they could predict. They knew that the guns were going to get better, and they knew that. They knew that speech was going to evolve. They knew that. I don't think
Yeah.
that they knew about surrogacy and putting babies into people's bodies, and that like I don't think they really knew about that. Birth tourism would become a thing that they knew we'd be able to eventually move faster places, but when it came to like importing the third world, that's one of the things I don't think that they know about. I know that they wanted immigration. They definitely did. One of the grievances was that King George wasn't letting people immigrate there. They wanted it, but they were also having people who were helping society. There's settlers and there's invaders, and they were having settlers and they were having people that were coming to do good things in their country. And King George was stopping that. So yeah, I think they would be shocked about the number of atheists. There were many that were deists or became deists later in their life. And that was just like, I don't know if I believe the correct Bible story, but I do believe there's a higher power. That was mostly what they thought.
Yeah. Weren't a few of them actually members of the Unitarian Church, or the early Unitarian Church?
Yes.
And that's kind of nuts when you think about it now, because they have like Paul up the front of the church and everything. But
yes,
yeah,
yes, they were.
I'm going to ask kind of not really what their opinion, but what your opinion. Well, I guess what their opinion would be in the current birthright citizenship case. I've had a swamped week, so I've been checked out of a lot of watching a lot of stuff. I apologize.
The 14th Amendment came. I think if they'd have to look at why we have the 14th Amendment, and they would agree that the 14th Amendment was to free slaves. They would agree with that. They wouldn't agree that it was that everybody on earth is an undocumented American citizen and we all have to pay for them. They wouldn't agree with that. They would look at the documentation, they'd look at how the 14th Amendment was written, and they would say, okay, this was definitely written to free slaves. But the fact that we've had so many progressive Supreme Courts in the past, one of them ruled in favor of birthright citizenship, and that's like stare decisis, so they have to like honor it essentially. So they would have to go back and repeal that earlier ruling, and then we need to just abolish birthright citizenship as an amendment. That's what needs to happen, and Rand Paul has put that out there. So he's got an amendment working. So we all need to get behind that. Call your senators. You want this.
Well, that was actually my next question is, what do you think the next amendment will be, and when do you think it'll get passed? I mean, other than the birthright citizenship, because I don't know.
What do I think it'll be? Probably something that's going to take more rights away from us, which is not what the amendments were meant to do. It was meant to give us more rights, or to enshrine more of our rights, I guess. So it's going to be something awful like the 17th Amendment. It's going to be something awful to take our rights away. I don't see anything passing anytime soon. It takes a long time to pass an amendment. I mean, unless we're talking about Woodrow Wilson era, then yeah, you can just bang them out in no time. But yeah, so that's my thought. Is it's going to be something awful. I would like it to be birthright citizenship, because that's detrimental to our country. We don't survive as a republic if we have to pay for the world to live here.
I think there's a lot of things that we shouldn't have to pay.
Oh God, yeah.
In the world, so I'm just kind of leaving it. But yeah, no, I just kind of had those thoughts listening to you and whatnot. I went for a quick break to get something to eat, and I came back and kind of you started on the grievances right as going in there, and I've heard you speak about the Constitution before, so that was kind of my.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, anyhow, other people can come up. I don't want to help the stage.
Oh, we're winding down. Holy cow! Wow.
I go live for a minute. Yeah. So, but I'll let you guys, I guess, say your good nights
All
then.
right. Well, thank you everybody for hanging out with me and hanging out with Olivia as we do on these Friday nights. I'm gonna have guests again. I have a guest. I have a what did I say? Phoenix Ammunition. So Justin will be on with me next week. The following week I see Sam Tripoli, so that's gonna be a fun show. He's always a lot of fun. You guys crazy. I like insane people. But I wish everybody a safe 4th of July weekend and have so much fun with your family. Do not blow your hand off. And yeah, just remember what this weekend is and what these men risked everything for. They knew what they were doing: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and they risked their fortunes and their honor, and they paid for it. A lot of them paid for it. So they like suffered greatly. A lot of them lost their fortunes. So anyway, remember this weekend what it's about. Have so much fun. Don't blow your hand off. And everybody, thank you all for joining the Josie Show. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. God bless you and stay free.